The Florida Cattle Enhancement Board is a big supporter of our research and extension activities. In this episode, I'm changing roles. Instead of the interviewer, I'm the interviewee. Dale Sandlin with statewide and his podcast Grazing the Facts is interviewing several researchers about their projects that are financed by the Florida Cattle Enhancement Board. This episode was co-released with him, and I would like to bring you a little bit of our conversation to explore one of our projects related to the variety trial and distribution of plant material to beef cattle farmers in Florida and beyond. If you want to learn more about other projects supported by the beef cattle industry in Florida, check Grazing the Facts podcast with Southeast AgNet Radio Network. There is a lot of great content that Dale and his team has put together for you to explain how we're using those funds and what the impact of this research and extension is having on the beef cattle industry in the state of Florida. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. And as always, if you have any comment, feedback, ideas to share, or if you want to let us know how you're using this information you're receiving through our Cow Talks podcast, reach out to us through forages@ifas.ufl.edu.
Well, howdy, folks. Welcome to the Grazing the Facts podcast. I'm Dale Sandlin with Southeast AgNet. Today, we're joined by Dr. Marcelo Wallau, Associate Professor and Forage Extension Specialist with the University of Florida. Welcome to the show, Dr. Wallau.
Hey, Dale. Pleasure being here. Thanks for the invite.
Well, first off, tell us a little bit about your background and your path to the University of Florida.
Sure, you bet. My path started a long time ago. I grew up in a farm in southern Brazil. We are on the border of Brazil and Uruguay, so very different from what people normally picture with Brazil. We have Herefords and Angus. We have prairies. We don't have rainforests. So it's quite a different environment there. And I was always passionate about agriculture, growing up in the middle, and also forages. I went on to pursue an undergraduate degree in agronomy in Brazil. And our undergrad there is very, very general. So we study many things about soils, crops, horticultural crops, economics, sociology, everything involved in agriculture. I came to Texas Tech as part of an undergraduate internship, and I was put in the path by one of my advisors of academia, or let's say graduate school. It was not something that I thought about before, and I thought, well, let's give it a try. I came to the University of Florida for a master's degree and ended up going back for a PhD down in Brazil, same university, because I thought I was going to go back to our farm and our region. After 3 years there, I decided that I would have better opportunities here. I was very used to the United States already. And so once I was finishing my PhD in animal science, I decided to look for opportunities here in the United States, and the University of Florida was hiring for a forage extension specialist. At first, I knew about extension, really didn't know much about the work of extension, but it really matched what I was hoping to do with my career, which was a good chunk of science and technical aspect, but also boots on the ground working with producers, because I really wanted to be close to the farming industry and be there with our farmers. That's the people I grew up with. That's my people. And I found in extension a great balance of those two that allows me to keep on my curiosity vein and learning more, also helping students and developing technology, developing human resources, and at the same time being strong and direct connection with the farming community.
Tell us about your current position and what those responsibilities are.
I'm a forage extension specialist, statewide responsibility, so I work with extension agents and producers all across the state. I started as 70% extension. Today, I'm 55% extension, and I have an appointment in extension administration as an associate program leader for agriculture and horticulture, which means I work with our colleagues in the county, in state level, all across the state, 67 counties in Florida. So it's very, very rewarding. And then 30% of my research commitment is mostly dedicated to applied research and things that are very directly influencing daily operations on the farm.
Obviously working in extension and having such a unique variability amongst the forages in Florida, from, the Panhandle all the way down to South Florida. What's the most striking point about that for you?
So I think we get hung up on the differences, and I try to take the other path. Similarities, I think forages are pretty much the same. The philosophy behind the use of forages, the physiology in terms of growth and how they respond to grazing management, fertilization, everything, it applies across. So it's pretty easy actually to go through the different environments in Florida, in United States, and the rest of the world if you have a strong base in forage production. So I think we get, oh, but it really doesn't work in South Florida or North Florida. Yeah, if you get technology at face value and you don't think how to adapt it before adopting it, that's when you start having issues. So the base of my extension program, actually, especially when I'm working with extension agents, is much more related to building that knowledge, that basic knowledge, that technical knowledge, and help them understand the production system, the needs of the farmers, the use of the forages, much more related to that than specific recipes or indications on you have to do this or you have to do that. In each case is different, but if you have that broad perspective, then it can apply. Of course, environments are completely different. South Florida and North Florida, we share some of the species, but not all of the species that can grow. But because of the climate and different soils, the growth patterns, the utilization patterns are completely different. We need to account for that. And it's very interesting. It's just a very challenging state, but also full of opportunities here.
Well, what's the best part about your job? Is it working with producers? Is it trying to find the best way to manage those forages? What's the best thing?
Yeah, the best part of the job is working with the farmers and the producers all across. And when I say farmers here, I'm just general producer, beef cattle ranchers, and forage farmers, and even farmers that I work with in other sectors. That's the best part for me. Really seeing that the technology we're developing, the knowledge we're developing here, the university is making a difference in the field, and they can come and tell you, like, hey, the thing we talked about, that thing we designed together, it's really making a difference, and I really appreciate that. So for me, that is my ultimate goal is to make sure that what we're doing here is having an impact in the bottom line of sustainability, of profitability, and keeping those farms competitive and those families in farming.
What led you to want to do your work in forages?
So this is something that I grew up with. I grew up in a ranch with we have beef cattle, dairy cattle, we have sheep and horses, and we have also miniature horses. We breed, we have seed stock operation. It's very diversified and it's grassland. And I grew up with the mindset of using the natural resources that to our advantage on preserving them and using as better as we can. And basically, the whole production system there, even for dairy cattle, is based on forage, a strong forage base. And many of those species are even similar to what we can grow here. The use of those forages are very similar in how we use them here. So I had that growing up. I think what the academia gave me was the capacity to understand the processes behind that. And I just found it fascinating to think about, oh, that thing that I saw growing up, I always saw while growing up, that's how it works. And here are the mechanisms. And now I can understand that and then use that to help people be better stewards of the land, be better forage managers and producers in general.
Well, what have you learned from the producers that you work with?
Man, I learn every single day. I learn every single day with them. And when I started here, there was also that little bit of fear. I'm not from this country. I'm young. I'm coming here working with folks that are way more seasoned than I am. What if I say something wrong? It takes a little bit to build confidence, but I also realized that they trust me. They trust my knowledge. They trust that. But the main thing is not being arrogant and understand that there is so much knowledge in the field that experience is extremely valuable. And what the academia gives me is the capacity to tap into their experience and understand what they have done and try to help them improve their system, not tell them what to do, but help them improve their system. So I'm here now in year 9, but in the past 3 years or so, I've really focused more on the concept of what we call co-designing. So basically, we're not coming up with technology and giving the farmers to use, which is a very top-down approach. I don't like that. I'm much more inclined to work with the farmers to develop something that is better for them. Each farm is different. Each producer has a different mindset, and what works for one might not work for the other. So we need to find something that is good for that specific situation, and that's where the co-designing come. When we're designing those systems together, I learn every day, and I'm don't have a problem to say I didn't know about that. I learned that one. I've messed up with farmers before, and they called me out, and I said thank you for teaching me this one. And there is no shame in that. We're all learning together. But they value that honesty and they value the positive intent and hard work.
Well, obviously, drought and weather impacts everything, especially forages. We've already seen the state and much of the Southeast, well, in fact, most of the country in the last few weeks have had to deal with drought. What's something that's unique about Florida in terms of having to manage that forage in a drought consideration?
So, Florida, one of the major challenges here is that our soil is very sandy. There's no water holding capacity. So, we're going to be in a drought very quickly. If it stops raining for a few days, it's going to be dry. So, we are constantly working with that drought challenge. What happened now is that we've been dry for such a long period of time. In some counties, for probably 2 years, we've been below average. But more recently, which is more palpable here, since August, most of the state been dry. And that also depleted a lot of the water reserves that are deep. Okay. So the water table is going down. And even some of the perennial forages or perennial crops, I work also with the countries, they are not accessing that water because it really dropped below that root zone. So that's one of the biggest limitations we have. We have abundance of water during the growing season, but it's very quick for us to get dry. And this is very intrinsic for Florida. Other than that, those environmental challenges, those climatic challenges, like drought, like a flood, like cold weather, they exist. We need to be prepared for them. That thing about the average year, yeah, we don't have an average year. There is always variation, but we need to be prepared for those big variations because likely to become stronger and more frequent. And we need to adapt our forage production system to be able to buffer for those. The biggest challenge this year is that with drought in August, in fall, with cold weather. So we didn't produce hay, we didn't stockpile forage, we couldn't plant any cool season forages, we didn't have winter grazing, and now in the spring we also don't have forage because it's late growing and the onset of growth is delayed. So it's kind of four strikes against us. So even some of the most resilient systems are going to struggle on this. And I've seen people really going out to buy hay. Hay is expensive, feeding whatever they can find to be able to keep those livestock and even getting rid of livestock because you cannot maintain those animals.
I guess a question I've got that kind of deals on the same lines is you mentioned, getting rid of some of the livestock. Why is it so important for cattle producers? Because, and let me preface this, we have folks that listen to our podcast that aren't in the cattle industry. But why is it important for cattle producers to be able to find that balance between the available forages and the cattle that in which they steward?
It's a perfect question. It's one of the bases of my extension program too, is that balance between forage production and forage demand. Whenever the demand is higher than production, you're in trouble. And I tell that all the time. It doesn't matter what you do, you're going to be in trouble. The only solution you have, the only couple of solutions you have are going to bring in feed or reduce demand. So we need to sell cattle, reduce your stocking rate, or bring in more feed. But sometimes you're going to lose money when you're in that need for destocking. And many times when you get to the point that you really need to destock, your animals are already declining in productivity, are already losing weight. So that's why this balance is so important. Always, always work with a positive forage balance. Now, important thing here, positive balance doesn't mean I produce just as much as I need. You need to produce twice as much as you need to be on a level plane because we cannot use all that forage. We need to only use part of the forage. We work in perennial systems. Those plants need to survive. So we cannot use all the forage we produce. That leads to overgrazing. So we are always kind of leaving half of that forage that we produce for the plant to be able to sustain growth, to be persistent, and also come back year after year. Otherwise, we don't have a pasture. On the other side of that, we have the animal. Every time that you limit intake, you're going to limit productivity. So you're hurting by heavy stocking rate, you're hurting your animal production or you're hurting your forage production. When you start hurting your animal production and get rid of animals, when you start hurting your forage production, it only goes downhill. So it gets into this downward spiral where less forage is more space is more weeds is more competition for resources. That means less forage means more pressure on those forages because of the cattle are selecting those fewer plants, and you keep on going downwards. So that's why that balance is so important for the management forest system, regardless of the grazing management you have.
Well, you mentioned the management there. A lot of the ranches in Florida are also home to the various wildlife species that call Florida home. As a cattle producer, you're not only just managing the forages for your herd, you also have to take that wildlife component into account too. What's some of the things that you've seen in your career so far about that importance of managing for both the natural and the raised livestock?
Yeah, fantastic question. So ranches are one of the key points of conservation of Florida wildlife. We have the conservation easements, we have the wildlife corridor, and ranches are an integral part of that. And we need to preserve the land. We really need to preserve the land. I think back in the days, people would think when we talk about this conservation part, oh, that's tree hugger, that's call me talk, or whatever it is, and that's can be furthest from the truth. We're preserving the land for us, and it's very important to preserve for the next generation and to do all of that. Now, on the other side, I also see a lot of the general media talking about how farmers or ranchers are abusing the land and all that, and that's also cannot be farthest away from the truth. Our people are interested in preserving the land. I grew up on the rangeland. In square feet that I go down and count species, I can find anywhere between 3 and 10, maybe 15 different species of forages there or other forbs. We have a very, very diverse wildlife too, and I just enjoy that so much. I mean, for me, it preserves the production as well. Here in the United States, we have an added benefit that you can get credits in multiple different ways for preservation, and also you can have income from that because you can have hunting leases, and that's a significant part of ranching income, especially in larger operations in the southern part of the state.
Well, what are some of the management practices that you've seen in your career, whether that's, you know, going through school? And I know Lubbock is not known for a lot of rotational grazing. It's for those who've never been there, it's pretty flat, it's pretty dry, it's pretty dusty, and surrounded by cotton. But what are some of the management practices that you've seen in your career so far that have been beneficial once a producer starts to put those into implementation?
Yeah, there's so many different practices and that can be implemented at different levels. When I talk to producers, I start talking about first of all that stocking rate that we discussed. Okay, that is the key point. That's the main point. If you are overstocked, there's not much I can do for you because any other intervention we do, it's not going to work well or not going to work at all. First point, we need to find that balance. Can we produce, as I mentioned, twice as much forage we need? The second point is how many forages we have in our system. If we only have one forage source, we don't have a forage system, we have a pasture. Which forage you have? Bahia grass. Okay, good. And no, that's it. Okay, that means when you tell me that, that means you don't have a forage management system. You have one forage and you're grazing that year round. That means you are sacrificing a lot of your pasture because both ends of the season, spring and fall, when Bahia is not really growing fast, you are overgrazing. Even if you're not overgrazing in the summer, even if the total balance is positive, but you're overgrazing in those two ends of the season. And also you're having to feed hay. You're gonna have to feed hay because you don't have any winter growth. So my second point is forage diversity. What forages can you grow in your region? How can you manage them to extend that growing season? So that's third point here. Can you stockpile? Can you use different fertilization strategies? Can you use different planting dates for annual forages? That was going to increase that diversity and expand that forage production curve. So if you think about a graph here with months of the year in the x-axis and forage production in the y-axis, forage production for Bahia grass production is going to be just one bell curve in the middle there, top maximum production in the summer, then it's going to decline to both in spring and fall. But you start stockpiling, you add limpo grass, you add Bermuda grass, you put some hay, you put some cool season forage, and all of a sudden you start overlapping those forage production curves, and you see that your forage production calendar start filling. So that's diversity. And then management. So 1, 2, and 3, stocking rate, production management. And then we're going to start talking about grazing management. People are always like, well, why didn't you talk much about rotational grazing? It's because most of the time, the main issues I see are not related to the grazing management per se, are related to the lack of forage or excessive stocking rate, to the lack of forage diversity, and lack of some basic management practices that can help us improve that forage production. That's my base point. Once all of that is organized, perfect. Let's implement some rotational grazing because now I can give you 30% more forage. The rotational grazing, yes, is going to improve your productivity, but only after you fix some of those problems. And this is one of the biggest misconceptions we have in forage management, that just by rotating the animals is going to solve our problems. It is not going to. If you're overstocked, you're going to continue being overstocked. Unless you bring more feed and more forages to get out of that negative balance, you're not going to improve your productivity just by rotating your animals. It can improve a little bit, it can be visual, but the bottom line is not going to change.
Well, you mentioned limpo grass in this last answer there. That's a specific thing that the Florida cattle industry has picked up on in recent years. Tell me, what has that impact been on having that additional forage been as far as the forage management system is concerned?
So limbergrass, South Florida, we also call them that Emartria, which is the scientific name Emartrotissimum. Limbergrass is a perennial warm season grass, same as Bahia grass, same as Bermuda. So why is so different? Well, limbergrass has a few very interesting things. First of all, it grows earlier in the season and later in the season compared to Bahia. Okay, so it has a longer growing season. Second, it can grow in wet areas, especially in that are periodically flooded during the summer. And that's one of the biggest uses in South Florida. Third, the digestibility declines slower than Bahia or Bermuda when we're stockpiling, when we're with maturity, the digestibility declines is lower. So we can stockpile that forage. If you want to make one move and one move only to improve diversity in forages in a range, and you really are limited in resources, you don't want to invest a lot. My advice is pull in progress, because just by having those 2 extra months of growth in the fall in that stockpile forage that we can graze in October, November, or November, December, it's going to cut that feeding bill significantly. So that's one of the biggest moves we can do. Of course, you're going to need to supplement, especially protein, because limbergrass is low in protein, but is a very good source of energy. If you're in South Florida, if it's not 2025, 26, that we got pretty decent frost there, but if you're in South Florida, that limbergrass can grow during the winter, of course, not a lot, but we estimate that up to 30% of the annual productivity of that limbergrass is during the summer months in the southern part of the state.
Tell me about your experience with the enhancement board so far. What has it done for your research?
Fantastic. So the Florida Cattle Enhancement Board has been crucial for the development of my forage extension and research program. I have been successful in securing funds, recurring funds with the cattlemen through this program, and it has been crucial for the work I do. Throughout the years, I had several different projects, but one of the most consistent ones is related to variety testing. Many of our producers want to know what varieties we have available, and this variety testing program also connects with the forage breeding program. So we are making available forage varieties, new forage varieties that the breeding group, Dr. Rios, are releasing, and also working with the industry to test those forages. So we keep on doing and testing those materials to see how productive, how resilient they are, and also providing planting material for our producers. So this is a very, very important project for me within this big picture of the Florida Cattle Enhancement Board.
Well, tell me about the project itself. What was the methodology of that project? How did you set up the study?
So this is a very extension-oriented project, and we have a couple of different components here. I'm going to separate them in variety testing in one side, and on the other side is pretty much forage material, plant material distribution. I'm going to start with the plant material distribution because that's the simplest. Basically, for forages that are vegetatively propagated, and specifically here I'm thinking about limbergrass and Bermuda grass, we don't offer materials on perennial peanut. So we maintain nurseries of the new materials, new forage varieties, namely Ken High and Gibituck limpo grasses, Miss Levy, Newell, and a few other ones that are coming soon, Bermuda grasses. We maintain those nurseries in 3 locations in Florida, Ona, Gainesville, and Mariana. And once a year, or sometimes twice a year, we invite producers to come, we harvest for them, and we give them plenty of material so they can start their nurseries and start establishing that in their land. And from there on, they expand. Why is this important? Because first of all, provides new genetics for farms. When you put new genetics, you are increasing the resilience because sometimes we have diseases like think about stem maggot. Anybody that has Russell or Alicia Bermuda grasses or Tifton 44 Bermuda grasses or even coastal are going to have problem with stem maggots. If you have some of the new materials, they are less susceptible to stem maggot. So now you increase the diversity. You're using the same species, but you increase that genetic diversity of our farm. So that's what we're promoting with this project. And again, we distribute this to the farmers at no cost or a very low cost, just so we can maintain that. And this is supported by the Florida Cattle Enhancement Board. On the other side is the variety trials. So in these variety trials, we call them official variety trials, and basically we're testing those forages, they're testing how productive they are, and in some cases also what's the quality of those forages and how they translate into production. A big example of that is the corn and sorghum trials. I know some of this is more oriented towards the dairy industry, and we translate some of those findings in how many pounds of milk you can produce per acre with different forages. There's a huge variation there. For example, if you select the top performing hybrids of corn compared to just the average, just randomly picking one, you're likely to produce anywhere between 16 and 30% more milk per acre just by the choice of variety. That's a huge impact in the dairy industry. Okay. Same thing for beef cattle. There is a lot of forages out there. There is a lot of different companies offering both annuals and perennials. By the way, this part, the official variety trial, focus mostly on on annuals, not as much on perennials. Many forage varieties there. We test them. We give information to the farmers on how much they produce. We have cool season and also warm season forages. We have some of this testing done on farm, and a lot of it is actually done at the research station, plant science research station in Cedar, Florida.
What have been some of the most exciting things that you found out of these variety trials? Has there been anything that surprised you?
Oh, I think that just that statement that by choosing the right variety you can improve the productivity. I think that is kind of a no-brainer. You have one choice. You make one decision, and that can impact your whole production system. You didn't change. You may change a little bit seed cost because those improved varieties might be a little more expensive, so it may increase a little bit the seeding cost. But you have the same amount of fertilizer, the same amount of inputs, and now all of a sudden you have anywhere between 16 and 30% more productivity. So that for me is huge. In terms of disease resistance, amazing to see some of those forages and how they perform, and especially in low production in low input environment, and all of a sudden they are completely diseased. And then you have something that tolerates a lot more pests and diseases, and that means you can really cut your production cost by using those varieties. The last aspect of it is the nutritive value. So in the beginning, in the first part of this interview, we talked about the quantity, how much forage we can produce, the balance, but a big component of the forage production system is also the quality of that forage. And especially for when we're thinking about lactating animals or growing animals like replacement heifers or steers, backgrounding steers, we really need quality forage. It's not going to do just on our Bahia grass. So some of those forages bring that quality to the table. And that's what we want to see. You see the much better production indexes when you are implementing some of those improved varieties.
So, as you start to develop the varieties and go into actual production of those at the nurseries, or in what way are you putting that seed in the ground? Are you putting in seed? What's kind of the process for those?
Perfect. So yeah, the sprigged ones are Bermudan limper grass. We have to sprig or limper grass plant with tops only. Same principle applies as you for establishing a pasture. You need good preparation. I call the 5 P's of pasture establishment. You have the planning. You need to know what you're going to do. You have the The prepping, you need to prepare that area, and prepare does not mean just put the disc on the disc on the ground. There is a lot more to that, and that needs to be done ahead of time. You need to really consider what the weeds you have there, what are the past crop, what are going to do, how we're going to use that forage in the future. Lime and fertilizer, you need to think about planting, which is the third P. And then the last two are priming and putting to use. And priming means giving the chance for that forage to establish well and be successful, and just later putting to use and what those parameters are in terms of putting it to use, how we're going to do that. So that's how I view any forage establishment. When we think about perennial forages, especially that are established using planting material, the cost of establishment is very high. We need to make sure we're not jumping any of those processes. They're not bypassing any of those processes, because the cost can be very high and the results can be very poor. A lot of the variety trials I do is actually with annual forages. So we call it a cone planter. So it's a different planting device that mimics a grain drill. Very simple. The only thing, instead of a hopper, we have a cone that turns and drops the seed in the distance we want. So we can accommodate for different seeding rates. We prepare all the seeds in the lab here, or seed packages, and we go on farm or go to the research station. Normally, I try to do bigger plots on farm. Farmers like to see, ranchers like to see those bigger plots. But they're still small, they're still research wise, but they can see how those varieties perform. The other thing we do is I give seeds for the extension agents so they can work with their stakeholders and put some of those trials in on farm there and work with them to show how things work and what are the different varieties, and those those ranchers then put them to use and fertilize and see how they grow and what they like. And we have very surprising things like, oh, I didn't know just by changing buying this ryegrass variety instead of Golf is going to produce so much more. Like, oh, I never heard about this triticale deal, and the cows really like it. Like, yes, this is what we're trying to get.
Well, as far as once a producer sees the varieties, right, and they go to try and implement them on their farm, is there what are some of the considerations they need to take in advance of putting those varieties in play to give them the best shot at success?
So I always tell them this is going to be an investment. If you're not going to do it properly, just don't do it. Or if you don't have the resources to do it in the whole area, just do part of it, but do it properly. Find a way to get that seed in the ground properly. And sometimes it's not a matter of equipment. Yes, if you have a grain drill or no-till drill, that's way better. But if you have to broadcast it, there are ways where you can put that seed in the right depth under the ground, pack it, and give the best chance you can for it to succeed. So there are many ways that we can do that. It's not a problem. The important thing here is to give the condition, and also, of course, moisture. You need to have moisture. There is no way to establish those forages without moisture. Consider what fertilization practices you're going to do before you even plant. What's the pH of that soil? Do you need any soil amendments? What's the potassium and phosphorus level? What are the micronutrients level? Do we need to bring it up before planting? And that goes into prepping that land and giving the chance for those plants to succeed later on in the priming phase.
Well, what are some of the improvements that you hope to try in future trials? Maybe something that you saw in this past year that you want to see
Oh man.
continue.
So I think one of the beauties about the work I do is that it's pretty cheap to fail. The only thing it hurts is my reputation, because people look at me and say like, "Hey, you're supposed to be the forward specialist and you fail on this one." And I love doing that because I have so many ways I failed, and I tell people, getting it right, it's it's not that easy. Getting it right is not that easy. And if I tell you like, have to plan this, and that, and do this and that, then we're gonna get it right. That gives you one perspective. But if I tell you like, hey, I've done this, then this, and that, and that, and that, and it failed, now you remember that information. Let's not do it because that's how I can fail, or let's improve upon that. So failure is a process of learning, and I'm not ashamed of that. So we always, Marielena, my technician here, and she's in charge of the variety trials. She always tells the companies we're working on, okay, we need 2 years to do any work because we're going to fail the first time, because we're learning the species. We're, even if it's something been working on before, we're learning the process. We're constantly improving. This year has been a fantastically challenging from a development standpoint was very interesting. Very interesting because the companies came to our field days and they look at the plots pretty much destroyed and they were, this is great to see. And I was kind of fishing like, there is not much I can show you here because everything is dead with the frost. And they said, no, there is a lot we can see because now we see how our forages are performing under those harsh conditions. And I think we're going to get more of that. I think we need to get used to that. We need to find ways that we can mitigate for that. We need to find more forage varieties that are more tolerant and more techniques that we can use to mitigate some of those climatic challenges that we're going to face. Planting later, planting earlier, more fertilization early, more fertilization later, planting depth, everything. There's so much to do that on that basic agronomic side. Research that we've done long time ago now that we're revisiting, seeding rates, for example, that we're doing also. So there's many things to still learn, and every year is a learning process for us in the field.
Well, talk about why it's important to do those variety trials through the university versus from a producer saying, you know what, I'm just going to go and I'm going to try it on my operation. Why is it so important to have the university system in place?
Yeah, this is a very important question, and I appreciate you asking it because it's something that the industry also asks me. Why do we need to pay you for doing the variety trials? Actually, they don't pay me. They give sponsorship for us to be able to operate. And the reason is because we are an unbiased venue for you to test that. We're going to tell you what works, and also in our situation here, we're going to test it in the conditions that are closer to the producer's reality. You ask me from the producer side, I'm talking about the industry, but the industry is working with a lot of producers to promote those forages. So it's very important for them to have that unbiased data. From the producer side, one of the biggest challenges is that when we get field A and field B and you say, let me plant this variety on field A, that variety on field B, and we'll see which one produces more, it really doesn't give you a true effect of the variety. What if field A is wetter than field B? Why the level of fertility is higher there? What if you planted because it's a larger area, you planted a couple of days later? What if it got a frost in different because it's lower in the field B and got more frost? So that's why we have replicated trials. And that's why we cannot only rely on one number, we need multiple numbers that we can get an average of those. And with that variation, with the differences between the locations, with differences between the plots within a site, it gives what we call confidence. So I'm confident to tell you that when I test this, the differences that I'm seeing are actually related to the genetic side, to the variety, and not to other things that could have impacted. And that's why those trials with the university are so important. And also that's why we need to do them small. We can't afford doing them big. And many people think that those little plots, they really don't mean a lot, but you need to realize that we have multiple of those little plots across. And that's the power of it. Again, another statistical term, the power to give us the confidence to separate those means and see what really is happening there.
Well, we'll have to have you on in the future again. As we start to wrap this up, I want to ask one final question. In your opinion, what's next on the horizon for the Florida cattle industry?
Well, there's a lot there. There's a lot to do in the industry to improve the industry. I'm going to focus on the forages because we have other bigger challenges that I'm not even equipped to talk about. But on the forage side, I think we're going to see that need for diversification to go away from that Bahia grass only production system and really focus on improving productivity. One of the biggest challenges is that most of the time more often than not, we have a hard time being profitable just because the cost of inputs are high. Right now, cattle prices are fantastic and we can invest more on those pastures, but that's not always the case. So how can we improve our pasture production and also get into people's mind that improving that pasture is investing on the cattle? Many folks only focus on the cattle side, on improving the reproduction, on improving the health, which is extremely important, don't get me wrong. But the health and the repro and the productivity start from the base, start from nutrition, and nutrition here starts from pasture. So there's a lot we can do there. And in the future, I'm looking forward to building more resilient forage systems with our farmers, with more options of forages that they can use across the year to improve that productivity. And also, as I mentioned before, buffer against those external stressors. This podcast was brought to you by the University of Florida Forage team with technical support from the UF Cows Faculty Instructional Resource and Support team. This episode was produced by Marcelo Wallau, Olivia Mauli, and Ashley Calabrowski. I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. And if you have any feedback, please leave us a comment in our social media or send us an email to forages@ifas.ufl.edu. Until the next one,